Good morning. My name is Amanda Rivera. I'm the hearing examiner presiding over today's case. The date is March 13th, 2025, and this is case DCI2023-00047. It's a rezoning request in the North Fort Myers planning community. Because it is a quasi-judicial hearing, all evidence and testimony must be taken under oath. So if you intend to speak, if you could please raise your hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you will provide is the truth?
Yes.
Okay. So the way we're going to proceed this morning is first we're going to hear from the applicant. They present their request in the case and call any witnesses that they may have. Following that, we will hear from the county staff who will present their recommendation, in this case, which is a recommendation of approval with conditions. After that, I'll open the public comment period and I'll call forward the cards that I have. There is only one opportunity to speak, but there is no time limitation. So please make notes as you go through things this morning so that you can make the most of your time at the podium. Following that, we'll come back to the applicant and the staff for any rebuttal and closing comments that they may have. So with that, I can get started. Did the staff have an affidavit of publication in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. If I reach, thank you. Okay, so the affidavit of publication will be labeled as the staff exhibit 2. Staff Exhibit 1 is the staff report. Okay, and I'm ready to begin.
Good morning, Madam Hearing Examiner. For your record, Richard Aiken of Henderson Franklin. I'm here this morning on behalf of the applicant on DCI 2023-00047, which is the Homefront Heroes minor CPD. Before we get started with our presentation, I just have a couple of matters to enter into the record. So I have a copy of a full-size master concept plan and the 11x17. They are the same as what is in the record. There are no changes to that. I also have 2 copies of our PowerPoint presentation for you, as well as a copy of the 48-hour letter.
With all the same attachments?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So the 48-hour letter, I'll take it again here. That was pre-labeled, thank you, as applicant Exhibit A. Let me process all of this. I'm going to label the PowerPoint presentation as applicant Exhibit 1. Thank you. Yes. Take that as well. The composite master concept plans then would be applicant Exhibit 2. And the 48-hour letter, as I said, was applicant A, so I'll just accept that again. Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. So just briefly on the 48-hour letter, there are some slight clarifications to conditions, but it's really just cleanup is all it is. I believe that Ms. Hewitt had a conversation with Mr. Roberts. We're in agreement with staff on those. There's no matters in dispute, and we are otherwise in agreement with the staff report, and I think we're pretty much on the same page with regard to everything here today. We did identify a few potential historical documents that you might have questions about and attach them. If you need them or have any questions about them as you go through today, we'd be happy to answer those. So we have our team with us here this morning. We have Daniel Cody, who's the Vice President of Homefront Heroes, Inc. He's here. Along with him, we have Elizabeth Benaquisto. She's also with Homefront Heroes. Neither one of them has an affirmative presentation, but they are available for questions if they come up, and they are here. Stacy Hewitt is our planner, our AICP planner with RVI Planning. Sam Marshall's the project engineer with Atwell. Barrett Bear-Stayskull is our environmental consultant with Bear Paws. And Hans Wilson is here. He's an engineer, and he may have some discussions about the multi-slip docking facility. And finally, Yuri Baikow is our transportation consultant. All of them have been accepted as experts in Lee County before the Lee County Hearing Examiner. So briefly to discuss the site location, you can see it's outlined in red on this slide here before you. It's on the east side of Moody Road, which is a county-maintained minor collector. It's a little more than 500 feet south of the intersection of Moody and Hancock Bridge Parkway. The site addresses there are listed for you. It's 884, 938, and 940 Moody Road. Currently, there's approvals on the property for a height of 75 feet, as well as multifamily development. That's been in place since 2005. It's kind of got a long history, and it's part of the larger PD that encompasses additional areas. So our request, and it's kind of a mouthful here, but our zoning request is to amend the existing Moody River Estates RPD CPD. to rezone the western portion of Tract M, which has been identified as part of this, consisting of 15.76 acres from residential plan development to commercial plan development to allow a maximum of 46,000 square feet of commercial uses, including up to 2 caretakers residence units. And there's also accessory multi-purpose outdoor recreation areas in the schedule of uses, boat ramps, and a private multi-slip docking facility with a maximum of 10 wet slips and 10 optional parking and dry slips. So as I said, that's kind of a mouthful. And we have a star here because the request has been reduced from 50,000 square feet and four caretakers residents at this time down to what I just mentioned, the 46,000 and the 2.
Okay, so that was the original request, was 50,000, because many of the letters of support and no objection and things in the back all referenced those parameters, but you've reduced it down.
We've reduced it, so I think we're okay there because if there was capacity for more, then there would certainly be capacity for less. So, stated what the request is, it's primarily to allow development of a charitable organization for Homefront Heroes in order to provide programs like education and crime prevention, public safety, social outreach, recreation activities, animal welfare services for youth and for veterans and for disabled and disadvantaged. That's the idea here to develop this property. So it's ultimately a charitable organization, a charitable use that will be there. The schedule of uses reflects some flexibility to provide those different things, and we've worked through that with staff to try to arrive at a place that makes sense for what the end goal here. I'll just give you a little bit about Homefront Heroes as we get into this before I turn it over to Ms. Hewitt. But the mission is to serve the community with programs that create a stronger and safer environment. You can see some photographs that are up here about projects that they've kind of already been involved in the community. This would provide offices, classrooms, and recreation facilities, as I mentioned before. The 2 caretakers residences, and we've had a lot of discussion about that with staff. It's designed because there will be differing schedules and shifts with the Lee County Sheriff's Office and the deputy employees who will be performing these services. And so we would need 2 of them in order to ensure that there's someone there to provide the security that's necessary at all times, at all hours of the day. We've also had discussions with the local community and the homeowners association there in Moody River, and made some commitments to them to have a presence there in that area. And so having 2 caretakers residents allows us to do that, and we believe that's a benefit to have a presence of someone from the sheriff's department there on site at all times. Just a little discussion about the youth programs. It will provide some of those. There's community outreach programs, crime prevention and education. The fact that this property is uniquely located on the waterfront there, it gives some additional opportunity for programming through things like kayaking and sailing and other things that potentially could be utilized, which is why we've got the multi-slip docking facility and the 10 wet slips and 10 dry slips as part of our request. So ultimately, this property provides Homefront Heroes with a great opportunity to provide a lot of different programs and services to the community charitably in that way. And so we believe that it's a good location for it, and as we'll discuss, we believe it's compatible with the surrounding area. Do you have any questions of me before I turn it over to Ms. Hewitt?
I have a lot of questions as we go through, but big picture, why was it chosen to do a minor CPD instead of a CFPD, for example? Because everything that's described really fits more into that community facilities posture, except for the Group 1 uses, which I'm guessing is why there wasn't some way in. Because I think when people see CPD, there's a fear that there's going to be commercial development, which your schedule of uses doesn't allow. But I'm just curious why that decision was made.
Yes, there was a lot of discussion of that up front, and that was the original path that we were going to take, but it had to do with the social services Group 1 use as well as the caretaker residence uses. And so it was decided that this was the best path to go in order to make sure that all the uses necessary were covered.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Stacy?
Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Hearing Examiner. Stacy Ellis Hewitt, for the record, I'm the Planning Director at RBI Planning and Landscape Architecture. I've previously been accepted as an expert in land use and planning matters in Lee County, and I request to be accepted as such this morning.
Yes, thank you.
This is the site future land use and zoning categories currently. The sites outlined there in red, and the sites currently in suburban, as is most uses to the north and surrounding the property. There is some wetlands identified as green on the island parcel and to the east. And the zoning is currently RPD, and to the north, we've got RM2 zoned property, and to the south, we have AG2 property. There's some extensive site history that I just kind of want to walk through to how we've got to where we are today. The original zoning for the property was in 2003 by Resolution Z03022, and that rezoned 222 approximate acres from AG2 and CT to RPD and CPD, and allowed a maximum 1,000 single-family, zero lot line, townhouse, and multifamily units, as well as 45,000 square feet of commercial with a maximum height of 80 feet. And then in 2005, by zoning resolution Z05048, it was amended to add 19.56 acres, known as Tract M, to the RPD to allow 200 of the approved 1,000 dwelling units with a maximum height of 75 feet. And it also included uses such as recreation facilities, personal and private on-site, a private boat ramp limited to the residents of the planned development, tennis courts, a multi-slip docking facility with approximately 53 slips, and a private recreational facility. The Bald Eagle management plan at that time was for west of Moody Road. The zoning has been administratively amended several times as outlined in the 48-hour notice. In 2006, 2009 was the Great Recession, so Tract M never developed. And there were, between 2007 and 2012, some civil lawsuits that resulted in some easements and requirements, such as the shared boat ramp that exists on the site, some deed restrictions for assessments, and it limited the subject property to 14 single-family units. This is outside of the zoning. This is private agreements. But there was also an acknowledgement in the deed restrictions of an intention to convey to a not-for-profit charitable entity for use consistent with a mission to assist young people to develop and grow into contributing members of society. The eastern 3.63 acres of Tract M that's outside of this request was limited to 55 multifamily units in that deed restriction, which is the basis for the TIS comparison that has 145 dwelling units assigned to this portion of Tract M. In 2013, a limited conservation easement establishing 125 transfer slip credits was recorded for the site. This is the existing 2005 master concept plan. There was residential north and south of Hancock Bridge Parkway. The CPD originally, the original CPD is Track K, which is at the corner of Hancock Bridge and Skyline, and it added, this master concept added this Tract M to the development.
So there's also Moody South, which is south of Skyline. Is that conventional zoning?
Yes, that's, I believe it's RM2, but yes, that's conventional zoned, not part of this plan development. This is documents reflecting the existing Tract M approval. As mentioned previously, it's permitted for up to 200 units, single family, townhouse, two family, or multifamily, and it did have a maximum height of 75 feet allowed today. You can see on the blow up of the site, the hatching here was for the private recreational facility, and as well as the demonstration of the existing boat ramp that was developed, the 75-foot tall multifamily, as well as recreation facilities on the site. And it also showed the portion to the east as well with those 55 units. To continue along, in 2013, the private boat ramp launch facility for the subject property and Moody River Estates was developed with associated parking, restroom facilities, landscaping, and infrastructure. There was as noted in the 48-hour notice, there was a minor change to the landscaping by LDO 2019-00170. DOS 2013-00023 was approved for the southern portion of the site, and that was approved for clearing and filling, which has partially been completed on the site. In 2015 is when the eastern portion of Tract M ownership changed and was severed from the ownership of the rest of the property for the subject request. And in 2021, an access, utility, and drainage easement was established along the south property line to that parcel.
So who owns the East Tract M?
It's a private owner that's not affiliated with the request.
Is there some, if you go, the slide that you just showed on the last one contemplated a connection point throughout the entirety of Tract M. So how are they getting access with the site plan that is being proposed today?
They through that agreement in 2021, there was, my understanding that it was a tax sale when the ownership changed. And in 2021, there was an access, utility, and drainage easement established for the 10 feet along the south property line. And there was an option along with that to purchase more of access there. But the option was terminated, and we do have those documents if you'd like them for the record.
No, it's not, I don't see that shown on the site plan, so I'm just curious if that's being.
It is shown on the 10 foot along the south property line is limited. It's marked as and demonstrated of that easement and recordation. And then the cross section of the south buffer also calls out the 10-foot easement.
Is there a version of the master concept plan that doesn't have the overlay? The overlay is helpful, but it makes reading the small print that's above the green.
No, we do
Trees
not
very
have a,
Okay. I will take your word for it, and I'll look at the enlarged version later. So thank you for giving me the large one, because I'm going to need that with my eyes. Okay, but you are showing that, so you're not affecting access to the eastern portion in any way with this request?
that's correct.
Thank you. That's all I need to know.
Then in 2017, there was an application for an administrative amendment for Royal Palm Sailing Club doing business as the Edison Sailing Center. And they applied for use of the property in response to a violation on some of the aerials. You'll see the older aerials, there's boats on the site, and that was affiliated with the use. But that, I actually was working on that request, and we weren't able to get that processed, so it was eventually withdrawn. In 2021, the bald eagle nest was abandoned on the west side of Moody Road, and in 2022, the new bald eagle nest south of the subject property was documented. And then in 2023, there was an LDO for a decorative fence on the subject property. Homefront Heroes request fulfills a long-term vision of nonprofit use for this site. The staff report does recommend approval. The applicant is in agreement with the staff report recommendation and the conditions and deviations as revised in the 48-hour notice, and I would like to request to incorporate the staff report and the 48-hour notice with attachments into my testimony this morning. The surrounding uses to the north is zoned RM2 Mangrove Bay, and it has multifamily with single-family condoed parcels that are one-story over parking, and there is also on-site is the existing on-site shared boat ramp facilities is abutting that location. To the east is Hancock Creek, as well as the part of Tract M, the eastern portion that's not part of the request, that remains zoned RPD. To the south is vacant AG2 parcel, and to the west is Moody Road, and then the entrance features and an existing 20-foot buffer, and there are 2 multifamily buildings that are in vicinity of the site that have existing buffers along Moody Road there. And both of those are 2-story. There's been continuous community coordination with the request. Homefront Heroes, they had voluntary outreach with the Moody River Estates Homeowner Association prior to filing the zoning application. And there's also been continuous coordination with the Moody River Estates Community Development District since October 23. And there was an on-site community event that was hosted on April 6th of 2024. And we did have the North Fort Myers Planning Community Required Neighborhood Meeting was held on September 24th of 2024. There are existing public services serving the site. Less than 2 miles of the site is the North Fort Myers Fire Station 2, EMS Medic 7, and the Lee County Sheriff's Office are located in these 2 locations here, less than 2 miles from the site. Lee County Utilities has adequate capacity to service the site, as included in the staff report attachment G, and the proposed development has significantly less flows than the existing approvals for the site. There is an existing 6-foot sidewalk on the west side of Moody Road, and there is a Lee Tran bus stop across Moody Road that's for the Gold Line route of the downtown Fort Myers River District trolley, which is a seasonal service, November through April. Route 70 runs along Hancock Bridge Parkway as well, north of the site. The existing master concept plan is being revised to refer to the second page for the minor CPD. The 10-foot access easement is actually identified on this portion as well, and then just demonstrates the portion of tract M that's no longer included. There are no changes to the existing entitlements outside of the subject property, just some clarification on where the conditions apply, and there's no changes proposed to the existing shared boat ramp. And the island parcels also remain in conservation.
So when you say shared boat ramp, you're sharing it with the residents of Moody River?
Yes, that's why we kept it as an amendment is because the on-site boat ramp is limited to the residents of the planned development for our site as well as the remainder of Moody River Estates. So it is a shared facility.
So I did my site visit yesterday, so that initial gate, one of the arms isn't operational, so I was actually able to get in and see the boat ramp. So that will remain gated, but it's only going to be access for the occupants of your site as well as all of the residents within Moody River. And then there's another gate on the opposite side, and that's going to be solely for the occupants of your site?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you. I was going to describe that in a moment, so
Okay.
thank you for clarifying that. But yes, the existing boat ramp, there's not going to be any changes to the current access and use of that. This is the proposed master concept plan. As stated, this is the location of the existing gates for the boat ramp facilities, which will remain, and then there will be additional gates for the proposed uses on the site. The proposed commercial or social services building is in the southwest corner of the site, and the caretaker's residences are in the northeastern portion of the site. There are the proposed private boat facility for 10 slips, and there's dry detention proposed interconnected along the west, south, and east portions of the site. You can see along the southeast corner the portion of the property that's within the 330-foot Eagle Nest Zone and the proposed buffer that's between the 330-foot and 660-foot Eagle Nest zones. There's the phase timing may be interchangeable as far as when things come on board, but phase 1 includes the temporary events with the outdoor recreation, petting zoo, bounce houses, food trucks, and the shade structures or temporary trailers that will be used on the site. Phase 2 is the handrails and no mooring sign to the existing dock for the fishing boardwalk, which is in this location. And installation of bollards for the existing boat ramp there's a boat ramp in this location that's going to be limited for paddlecraft and non-motorized vehicles. And there's also the private multi-slip docking facility will be a phase with optional boat trailer parking, and that will be in this location, which is optional for either the boat trailer parking or the outdoor recreation uses that will be on the site. And then there's also potential paddlecraft access to the existing dock in this location. The existing boat ramp, again, is to remain, and the request is a maximum of 46,000 square feet, including the maximum of 2 caretakers' residences. As far as compatibility for the site, the maximum height is being reduced from the current 75 feet to 45 feet for the commercial building and 35 feet for the caretaker's residences, and must demonstrate the compliance with the architectural standards at the time of development order, and any potential lighting on the site must also comply with the Land Development Code, which minimizes light pollution, glare, and light trespass, which will be demonstrated at the time of development order.
So the marina or the boat slips that you have there and the parking, they're still utilizing the boat ramp that's at the top. So they would have to put the boat in, traverse down, and then park the trailer. Is that the intention?
Yes, but yes, or it can also be for boat access to the site, which is, for people that are coming on boats and coming to the site. So it won't be limited only to the existing boat ramp. It's also for people boating to the site location as well.
If they are trailering, though, they're not to use is the facility, when you say a shared boat ramp, the boat ramp is shared. Is the parking that's there
The
currently?
entire facility up there is shared with this site as well as across the street. And that was the same with the 200 multifamily and the 53 multi-slip docking facility, either or. It's a shared facility. Did you? Yes.
No, I just wanted to ask.
Yes. Just for clarification, the proposed multi-slip docking facility is not shared. That is limited to the proposed commercial plan development. The existing facilities as for the boat ramp and the facilities up in the north, those have an existing easement that's documented on the plan as well, and that is what is shared as limited in the conditions of the existing and proposed zoning resolution, that's shared with both the RPD and the proposed CPD.
I'll have a question on conditions about that later, but we'll get
Okay.
to that. Thank you.
Thank you. And regarding the deviations for the site, the existing deviations remain as amended by the staff report attachment E and the 48-hour notice. Proposed deviation 15 is from Land Development Code section 10-415 to allow navigable waterways within the boundary to be excluded from the required open space calculations and to allow preservation of the existing mangroves to meet the indigenous requirement. This is based on the land area instead of, and removing the area of Hancock Creek from the request, just based on historic surveys for the site. And the existing indigenous continues to be preserved, and staff recommends approval subject to condition 35, which is provided here to just require that the minimum open space depict 3.73 acres based on 30% of the 10.78 acres of land. I do want to take a moment to describe some of that just for clarity. There is the vegetation map was mapped for the entire boundary, and you'll notice the areas that have been depicted on the master concept plan and the conceptual open space plan that demonstrate the areas that are within the land and under our control and areas that are within Hancock Creek. And this dark line along the edge demonstrates where the land is the 30%, the 10.78 acres for open space is calculated on. It doesn't include like the man-made water bodies and the boat ramp that are in water. Those were included in the land area as well. They're included in the open space calculations, but the natural waterway is not.
So is that, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
You so 3.73 is what condition 35 has, but that's showing 3.78.
This is there is next to that, it says the minimum 3.2.
Okay, so it's 3.23. It says 3.73 in condition 35.
Oh,
I
thank
think
you
you
for
show that on the next slide.
Thank you for catching that.
So I just need clarification on which number. Is it supposed to be 3.23 or 3.78?
Should be
3.73, right?
3.73 is what it says. But I
Well,
don't know
so
what-
it says, hold on.
Yeah, this
So
is what's provided. I need to do the math of 30% of 10.78.
Well, but it says the minimum here in parentheses is 3.23, and then it says we're providing 3.78. I thought the minimum was 3.73, and we're providing 3.78. Does that sound right?
We'll check the math
Yes.
on that, just to be sure. I just wanted to be sure because
Thank you.
it said 3.73 wasn't shown anywhere on the master concept plan or the open space table, so I wanted to be sure that which number you're being held to and that you're committing to provide.
Thank you. I will verify that calculation and get back to you on, just to confirm which number that was, and check with staff as well. Thank you. Deviation 16 is from Land Development Code 10-421A8, which requires buffer plantings installed on the exterior side of the fence to allow the decorative fence outside of the existing Moody Road buffer. This replaced a previous fence that was located along the property line, and it's consistent with other properties north and south along Moody Road, and staff does recommend approval. Deviation 17 is from Land Development Code Section 10-416D, which requires a type C or F buffer when a commercial abuts residential and a 30-foot buffer when commercial abuts a public preserve to allow the buffers shown on the master concept plan. The north property line is to allow the existing type B buffer to remain that was as part of the boat ramp, and we're not changing anything abutting that area. The east property line is to allow the existing indigenous trees within the 330-foot eagle nest zone, and the type C or F buffer will be provided outside of the 330-foot eagle nest zone. On the south property line, it's to allow the existing indigenous trees within the 330 eagle nest zone, 10-foot tree planting area outside of that, and the proposed 30-foot buffer between the 330 zone and the 660 nest zone. The north buffer was previously found consistent and remains consistent, and the east and south buffers were recommended for approval with the Eagle Technical Advisory Committee. Staff recommends approval subject to condition 34. This is just a close-up again of that proposed 30-foot buffer to the south and where the type C buffer will just remain. We've got a note on the plan for no earthwork or plantings within that 330-foot buffer zone, but the existing vegetation will remain, the native vegetation. And then the cross-section demonstrates that existing 10-foot easement, the 10-foot planting strip, and then it'll also have planted swale and dry detention in that area. Condition 34 spells out all of their buffers and is consistent with the master concept plan and will require the development to demonstrate that at the time of development order. Deviation 18 is from Land Development Code Section 34-2020B, which allows a 10% reduction in required parking when you have boat slips on the site. And this meets the requirements of the Land Development Code. And for the uses on the site, we do anticipate ride sharing, parent drop-off, and potential bus drop-off, which will also add to the justification of the request, and staff does recommend approval. Deviation 19 is from Land Development Code Section 10-291-3, which requires more than one means of ingress and egress to allow the previously approved and constructed single access to remain. Letters of no objection are included in the staff report from North Fort Myers Fire, Lee County Public Safety, and the Lee County Sheriff's Office. And staff recommends approval subject to condition 36, which, as required by code, will be required to file a notice in the public record about the access for the site. All of the existing and proposed deviations enhance the achievements of the objectives of the plan development and protect the public health, safety, and welfare.
When you say potential bus drop-off, are you referencing that trolley that's going there, or would it be to the site?
No, it's for sites. The programming is still preliminary, but that we anticipate that for some of the youth events, there could be bus drop-off for youth coming to the events and
They
for
drop
the
off
services.
And where there's a pretty hefty throat
In-
right now, the entrance, is that where they would get dropped off?
No, it would be internal to the site.
They would have access through the gate to get.
Correct.
I asked because when I did the site visit yesterday, there were children that I assume are Moody River residents that were sitting waiting for their bus stop. And it seemed like that's a more and more heavily trafficked road on Moody, and there's no facilities there for them. There's no shade structure, there's no bench, there's nothing, which obviously wasn't required under the development. But I'm just curious if there was any interest or attempt to do that here, if you're going to be receiving any kind of bus traffic to the site. So that's something just to consider down the road, I guess. But if they're going to be entering the full site and you're not going to be having them at the Moody River Road entrance.
Right, this is proposed just for the uses on the site, and the activities related with Homefront Heroes is what we're addressing as far as that. The conditions from the 48-hour notice, I do have them in the presentation. Most of them are a carryover of the existing zoning resolution with some minor clarifications. We did add from the 48-hour notice, the Homefront, we did add a portion for the Homefront Heroes minor CPD, restricting the uses that have been demonstrated and provided and shared with the community at the neighborhood information meeting. And we did just add for clarification about the private boat ramp that the existing non-motorized ramp, but I do, now that we've been speaking of this, the existing non-motorized ramp we need to clarify that because that is private to Homefront Heroes and not part of the portion, the existing boat ramp to the north, which is limited to the owners, residence owners, and their guests within the plan development.
And the language there I had flagged was within this plan development because that wasn't clear, that maybe when you're revising it, maybe that language would be helpful in making that revision because it wasn't clear if you meant this plan development, the minor CPD, or if you meant this plan development, the entirety of the RPD CPD.
Okay.
So maybe just reworking that language for that condition.
Thank you. The remainder of the conditions we've made no changes to the conditions of approval for the existing residential plan development and commercial plan development. And then we have the property development regulations to ensure that those are met and limits the height to the 45 feet and requires anything over 35 feet to meet Land Development Code Section 34-2174 for that additional setback. There was just some clarification since there are so many conditions as to which ones apply to the west side of Moody Road. And also, Condition 5 was revised just to reflect the location of the Eagle Nest is no longer in that tract, so we just made a clarification there. On Condition 14, we just made a minor clarification since the retail site location standards are no longer applicable. The conditions for the subject property start on condition number 28, and those conditions all require, have been worked with staff just to require the bald eagle management plan that's been approved, as well as providing documentation for the boat slips on site and limiting the depicting and on the development order which boat slips are proposed, as well as preventing motorized vessel access to that existing boat ramp on site to the south that's on the Homefront Heroes portion. There's also conditions for the existing island parcel for the indigenous to remain, and the buffer conditions that we've already gone through, and the open space, which we will clarify that number.
Condition 18 about the ag uses that you clarified is west of Moody Road. Obviously, those ceased a long time ago. Was this land ever used for agricultural, or has it just been vacant land?
I don't believe so, not that I'm aware of. There was single family on it prior. But those were the existing agricultural uses were from the original zoning approvals. We did add in conditions to incorporate the administrative amendments that were on record for the site, and updated the deviations to reflect those that I just went through and the conditions for a site, which are recommended for approval.
Okay, so what you've provided is a holistic revision. This can replace the existing RPD, CPD approvals.
Yes.
Thank you for doing that. That's not always done, so.
My pleasure. And at this time, I will be returning for the LEAD plan and land development code consistency, but at this time, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Marshall.
Would you be, before you leave, are you the person to ask just to explain a little bit? You explained broadly the activities, but the building itself, because a lot of the activities tended to be more outdoor recreation. What's going to be in that building? Because it's 42,000 square feet. It's pretty sizable.
Yes, it's going to be for offices and classrooms and recreation facilities indoor. That's a large part of it as well, and that's why that group was used for the traffic impact statement, even though this is going to be a private, social services use. That was why that recreation use was used for that comparison. But the facility size is to incorporate those indoor recreation facilities as well.
Okay, so maybe after-school activities, gymnasium, things like that, fitness areas?
Yes, there's for basketball courts, potential, and again, it hasn't been finalized, but that's what the vision is to have offices, classrooms, and the recreation facilities indoor for some of these programs that are proposed for the site.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Sam Marshall. I'm a Florida registered professional engineer. I'm with Atwell. I've previously testified in this venue before as an expert, and I'd like to be accepted as an expert this morning in matters of civil engineering.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And today I'm going to talk with you about stormwater management. I'm going to focus on that. We're not to the point of designing a system yet, but when the system gets designed, it's going to have to comply with the South Florida Water Management District regulations and also the Lee County regulations. It'll be designed to satisfy those codes. The ERP is going to guarantee that water quality and water quantity issues have been met and satisfied. We're not going to have any adverse impacts with either on our neighbors or surroundings or on the site. We are going to have to go through the permitting process. It's an ERP, environmental resource permit process, with the Water Management District. At the same time, we will not receive a development order. As you're aware, we're not going to receive a development order without receiving that permit as well. The project will be designed to meet all of the goals and objectives of the LEAD plan and the land development code as well. There's been previous permit history on this site. It will be basically redesigned and replaced with new permitting, new design to meet the regulations and to match the proposed site plan. And that's the conclusion of my presentation. If you've got any questions.
I assume, obviously, the Moody River has its own ERP that's operational and functional. Will this be kind of a spin-off of that permit, or will it be a standalone permit?
It's going to end up being a standalone permit. Moody River does have its own permit. It has an outfall pipe that runs through this site. That's going to continue. That will remain. That's part of the current permit, and that will remain in existence.
So it outfalls across or under Moody and then into?
No, this site will directly discharge to the creek after the water is treated. Moody actually discharges through this property. There's an existing outfall pipe that goes through this property, and that will remain.
That comes from the east or the west of Moody Road?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning, Madam. Barrett Stay-School with Bear Paws Environmental. I've been previously testified in this room as a expert in wetland and wildlife ecology, and I'd like to do the same.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I've done species surveys out there numerous times, and as Stace said, there was an eagle's nest prior to 22 that existed west of the roadway. Those guys moved over south of the property in 22, and the nest was destroyed by Ian. We went through the technical advisory committee with Lee County, coordinated with the county staff themselves, and get our bald eagle management plan approved by them. So we're following by that. The project does meet all the requirements for the indigenous preserves and preservations. There were some larger oaks in the southeast corner that just so happened to be within that 330 zone. Those were also incorporated into the site plan, and we coordinated, as Stacy said, with that buffer along the south. There were no other wetland species, any other things like that observed on site. We meet the environmental goals and objectives of the Lee Plan and LDC.
So the eagle, you mentioned it here too, it was also mentioned in the report. It was active but not successful for the
Yes, ma'am.
past 2 seasons.
Correct,
2
yes.
years.
I don't have the full documented data from 24, but I know 23 was active, unsuccessful. 24 was also active, but I'm pretty sure that was also deemed unsuccessful as well.
So they still have, I'm not as familiar or well-versed, if you could just, in the regulations, they still have to abide by these even though there isn't presently an eagle that's on the
Yes,
site?
ma'am, correct. For some reason that was deemed unsuccessful, if it's active, and when you have to abide by the guidelines. And the only way to get relief of those guidelines if the nest is declared lost or abandoned for at least 5 years. So as long as the eagles are there, they have to abide by the guidelines, and they have to do so within 5 years after it's declared lost.
What's the distinction then between active and unsuccessful? So you've seen evidence that they're there, but they're not,
Yes, ma'am, correct. They haven't produced any fledglings, any young.
okay, so as
Or
long
if
as.
they did, they didn't make it.
Okay, so you're not to the point, the clock isn't ticking for it to be declared abandoned?
No, as long as they're actively nesting and they're in present, the nest is active. It's when they disappear or the nest is knocked down and never rebuilt, that would be an abandoned nest or lost nest.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Hans Wilson. I'm a licensed professional engineer and have been recognized as an expert witness in marine engineering and environmental consulting, and would like to request the same recognition. The project that we're talking about is the marine-related component. The existing water depths in this location are extraordinarily deep in many cases. Let's see if we've got the little arrow. Here we go. So here's our depth contours. We have a surrounding area of mangroves. We have selected an access location through an existing opening in the mangrove fringe. This is intended to be a floating dock to accommodate a variety of vessels. We have defined slip sizes here for 1 through 6, and then slips 7 through 10 is parallel mooring for a variety of vessel sizes. In the northwest corner, we've got an existing dock that runs down through here that we're going to be rebuilding and then adding a ramp and a floating platform for canoe and kayak launching. This project is currently in permit application with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and is being reviewed for consistency with the Fish and Wildlife Service and manatee impacts. The project meets the county's manatee protection plan requirements, and in fact, it's a significant decrease in the total number of slips that were authorized for this property. And the balance of those slips that are not going to be built have been sequestered into a holding company that are available for the market if the applicant should choose to sell them on the market or do otherwise. The 10 slips are what were considered to be what was needed for the uses that are planned for the site, which is mixed. We anticipate we'll have law enforcement vessels here, which is good because we've lost a lot of marinas in our area from these hurricanes. So the availability of boat slips in general has been decreased, and trying to provide access for law enforcement to get out on the water is really important. We do not have really enough law enforcement on the water for boating safety and for adherence to our manatee protection plan, our speed zones. So this is a positive. But also this is an opportunity because of the educational nature of this development to have the youth of our community be exposed to law enforcement and on the water law enforcement. We need that kind of exchange with our population so they understand how important that is for our community and for protecting our resources. Again, the slip reductions from 53 slips to 10. The balance is being held by by a holding company within the applicant. And the project meets the marine goals and objectives of the LEED plan and the Land Development Code. You can see over here, we are in a slow speed zone coming out onto the river. And it's pretty much it's actually really a pretty small marina facility compared to what it could be. We did have, if we wanted to, there could have been additional slips placed out along the waterfront here. There's other locations, but this is a very well-protected location and very secure location, and we think really is the best setup for what we're proposing to do on the site.
And the mechanism that you use is it's a conservation easement of some type, or some type of easement that's restricting you so that you can't come back later and say that you're going to put the additional slips on the outside that you just noted.
They hold the rights to those slips, so if they wanted to come back and try to put those slips back on the property, they could. But I will tell you that's not going to happen a third time because we've already done it a second time. And it's been a real challenge with county staff and the county attorney on how do we make that happen, because this project originally had been secured in conservation easement and no slips were supposed to go onto the property. And then they realized, well, we do need both slips. So we went through this modification of the conservation easements that sequestered those slips and now have placed those slips back on the property. But at this point in time, I would say, no, that's not going to happen. And it's likely those slip credits now will be transferred to somebody that can actually put those into play at a different location, a better location.
And once that happens, if that happens, they can't double dip though and
No.
claim those credits once
No.
they're sold to an independent.
Once those are transferred to a receiving property, it's a done deal.
Thank you.
And, Madam Hearing Examiner, for the record, Richard A. And I just wanted to follow up real quick on what Mr. Wilson said about the conservation agreement and the slip credit transfer agreement. So I believe condition 29 sort of speaks to that. That's in the proposed conditions right now. It provides that prior to local development order, the western 15.76 acres of Tract M, the developer must demonstrate that the recorded conservation easement has been modified to allow for a maximum of 20 boat slips to remain on the property. So the mechanism is that there is an existing conservation easement. And in fact, I don't believe that the way it's written, it actually prohibits use of any of the slips that were created on site, right? So what we are doing is proposing an amendment that would limit what is allowed on site to that which we have shown here, and all the rest cannot be used on site anymore. So it would create a holding entity. Those slip credits would have to go into a holding entity, and so what we're asking for would be the maximum that could be used on site.
And it's 20 in the condition, even though they're showing 10. So is the reservation of the 10?
It's 10 and 10, right? So here's how they count it, right? So they count 10 wet slips and 10 dry slips. So a parking spot counts as a slip.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for the clarification. Good morning.
Good morning. For the record, Yuri Baika with TR Transportation Consultants. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of Florida. I've been sworn in and previously accepted as an expert in transportation planning and would like to be accepted as one today as well.
Yes, thank you.
So we prepared a traffic analysis for this rezoning request, which again is seeking approval of a charitable organization known as Homefront Heroes. As part of the traffic analysis, we first prepared a trip generation analysis consistent with the latest IT trip generation manual, which is a required source for us to use to come up with traffic projections for projects. For the trip analysis purposes, we analyzed the worst case scenario by assuming IT land use code of recreational center. And then for the caretakers residencies, we assumed traditional single family. And again, that was done to ensure that we analyzed the worst case scenario for traffic study purposes. And table 1 here shows our trip generation analysis. It is very likely that the trips that you see in table 1 kind of overestimate of what the actual facility is. As previously mentioned, a lot of activities will occur after school hours or during the weekends or during the summer days. And again, we anticipate a lot of ride sharing to this facility. So the trips you see in table 1 are probably overestimate the weekday peak hour trips that you'll see for this facility when it comes online. And the one thing of notice you see here, we assumed 4 units, and as previously mentioned by Richard, we've reduced that number to 2 units for the caretakers' residencies. And then Table 2 here shows the trip generation comparison between the approved RPD zoning on this western portion of the site. As Stacy previously mentioned, the eastern portion was assigned 55 units. So for our analysis, we assumed 145 units for this portion of Tract M. And so when you do the trip generation comparison between our conservative number of trips and the existing RPD, you can see the net trips are slightly increased, but again, nothing too extremely significant in terms of traffic. And so then, as part of our analysis, we prepared our typical level of service analysis on the surrounding roadways, which included Moody Road and Hancock Bridge Parkway. And the results of our analysis indicate both of these roadways will operate acceptable level of service C in the future project build-out conditions. In other words, there will be sufficient capacity on Moody Road and Hancock Bridge Parkway to support this rezoning request. And the staff has reviewed our traffic report and agreed that this project will not have a detrimental impact onto the surrounding roadway system. And so, in my professional opinion, this project is consistent with the transportation element of the LEED plan and the Land Development Code. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Is there any, under the existing approvals, would a signal have been required at the intersection of Moody Road and Moody River Parkway? I think that's what that road is called.
No.
Okay, and you're generating not enough in this request either to warrant a signal, to your knowledge?
Right, yeah. I mean, you would have to have like a Walmart level of traffic to require a traffic signal. And so the traffic signal is based on MUTCD warrants, and one of the things it looks at is the number of through traffic that's on that road as well. And it's my understanding there's not significant through traffic on that road to ever warrant a signal there at that location.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stacy Hewitt again for the record. The request is consistent with the LEED plan as outlined in the staff report and attachments. It's consistent with policy 1.1.5, the suburban future land use category. The location has been approved since 2005 for significant development. No industrial uses are proposed on the site, and it appropriately protects the existing residential. It reduces the height from 75 feet to 45 feet, reduces the multi-slip docking facility from 53 to 10 slips, and the existing buffers along the north and west continue to be compatible with the residences adjacent to the site. Public services and urban infrastructure are available. It's appropriate compatible infill development, and it's also consistent with policy 1.51 for the wetlands future land use category, as the island indigenous wetlands remain in a conservation easement, and the wetlands will be preserved to the maximum extent possible. It's also consistent with objective 2.1 and 2.2, policy 2.2.1 on development timing and location. Again, it is infill of compact and contiguous development and compatible with the surrounding land uses. It's consistent with standards 4.1.1 and 4.1.2 for water and sewer, as the letter of availability has been provided. It's consistent with policy 5.1.5 to protect residential. Again, it reduces the building height and the previous uses on the site and provides adequate buffering. It's consistent with goal 6, policy 6.1.1, 6.1.4, 6.1.5, and 6.1.6 for commercial land uses. The staff and the applicant agree that there's no detrimental impact on surrounding roadways. Adequate landscaping and buffering and open space are provided, and again, it is reducing the previously approved height. It's also consistent with goal 30, and as well as policy 17.3.5 and policy 30.5.3 for the North Fort Myers planning community and public input. We did hold the required public information meeting. The site's not located with any of the designated center or overlays in the North Fort Myers planning community, so those are not applicable to the site. And we did provide community outreach and we are proposing community outreach and recreational uses along the waterway. It's consistent with goals 60 and 61, policy 64.1 for the stormwater management design and protecting water resources. The required ERP will demonstrate compliance, and we are providing planted detention areas. Policy 101.1.1, 101.1.2, 101.3.2, 101.3.5, 101.4.2, and 101.4.3 for coastal areas. It does protect wetlands in the coastal high hazard area, and the development is limited to uplands. Any mitigation required will be determined at the time of development order, and the site will meet the minimum finished floor elevations. There are no new seawalls proposed for the site, and repair or maintenance of the existing seawalls will comply with the Land Development Code. It's also consistent with policy 123.6.1 on the bald eagle, as it has been conditioned to meet the bald eagle management plan that was approved by the Eagle Technical Advisory Committee. It's also consistent with objective 128.4, policies 128.4.5, 128.4.7, 128.4.8, 128.4.9, 128.4.10, and 128.4.11 for marine facilities. The number of slips were previously established for this site and have been significantly reduced as far as what is being constructed. It's consistent with the manatee protection plan, and there's adequate water depth. It's in a slow speed zone, avoids mangroves and wetland impacts to the maximum extent possible, and flushing will be provided from upstream, and there are adequate uplands for the use. The request does meet the required findings and review criteria found in Land Development Code Section 34-145 D4A1. As stated, it complies with the Lee Plan. It does meet the code and other applicable county regulations and qualifies for the requested deviations. It is compatible with existing and planned uses in the area and provides sufficient access to support the development intensity. The expected impacts will be addressed by existing county regulations and conditions of approval, and it will not adversely affect environmentally critical or sensitive areas and natural resources. It's also served by urban services, even though we're in a future suburban land use category. It's also consistent with Land Development Code Section 34-145 D4A2, the finding and review criteria for planned developments. The proposed use and mix of uses is appropriate for the site. The site has been approved for development since 2005, and the request fulfills the nonprofit vision for the site. The recommended conditions provide sufficient safeguards to the public interest, and each of the requested deviations do enhance the achievement of the objectives of the planned development and protect the public health, safety, and welfare. And that concludes our presentation. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
You mentioned the phasing schedule, and that might change. It's a little fluid, but do you have any idea of timing of when any of the horizontal and vertical construction might be happening?
It's going to be based on the funding and program uses for the site, so I don't have an answer for that at this time.
But the temporary events, the intention would start right away, if for the outdoor activities and things that don't require the building that's being proposed.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so Madam Hearing Examiner, just Richard Aiken again for the record. That concludes our presentation. We would request a recommendation of approval with the conditions as clarified in the 48-hour letter agreed upon with staff. At this time, we'll turn it over to staff unless you have other questions of us. We would request an opportunity for rebuttal after public comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think before we begin with staff, we'll take a break. So we'll take a 10-minute break and reconvene at 10:15.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We're back on the record, and we can begin with staff whenever you're ready. Good morning.
Good morning. For the record, Brian Roberts, Development Services Manager, Lee County Community Development. This is DCI 2023-00047, Homefront Heroes, minor CPD. Sure. Thank you. For the record, I've been previously qualified as an expert witness in land use planning, Lee Comprehensive Plan, and the Lee County Land Development Code. Asked to be qualified today.
Yes, thank you.
Next slide, please. Request and recommendation. I'm going to go through these slides kind of quickly. The applicant covered most of the information. They're amending the existing Moody River RPD CPD to rezone the western 15.76 acres. It should be, looks like the 2 dropped out there, or 6 dropped out there. It's 46,000 square feet total, max of 46,000 square feet, and staff recommends approval with conditions. Next slide, please. The property information, the property is located at 884 Moody Road. It's in the North Fort Myers planning community. The applicant covered the future land use and had the same maps that I do have in the zoning district. Character of the area, it's south of Hancock Bridge Parkway. It's predominantly residential uses. There's 2020 conservation to the south. There's existing transit stops and sidewalks on Moody Road in the area. The surrounding uses to the north is the Mangrove Bay condominiums, zoned RM2 and in the suburban future land use category. To the east, it includes portions of the navigable waterway of Hancock Creek. Also shares a property line with the remainder of Tract M from the original rezoning, which will retain its residential plan development zoning, and is in the suburban and wetlands future land use category. The south, the subject property abuts land zoned agricultural, AG2, in the suburban future land use, and is in the conservation 2020, and is currently has the Eagle's Nest that we saw earlier, and you see on the master concept plan the 330 and 660 buffer zones. And to the west is the existing Moody River Road, which is a county maintained minor collector, and Moody River Estates residential plan development, which is in the suburban future land use. The next slide goes over the findings criteria. I won't go through all the criteria. It's been gone through with the applicant. You can advance through that. I'll go through some of the lead plan analysis. The property is in the suburban and future land use, wetlands future land use category. The suburban future land use category is predominantly residential areas. It emphasizes the protection of existing residential development and does not permit industrial land uses. The applicant is not proposing any industrial land uses. The rezoning is reducing previously permitted heights, is reducing some intensity with regards to water and sewer consumption. The traffic estimates do show a little bit higher traffic, but they're on the conservative side, I believe. And it locates the commercial building to the southwest portion of the site. Lead Plan Policy 1.5.1 describes the wetlands future land use category as low density residential and recreational uses that won't adversely affect the functions of the wetlands. The wetland land use is on the island. The applicant has proposed some past boardwalks and nature trails. However, the master concept plan currently doesn't show any development in that area. Objectives 2.1, 2.2, and 2.2.1 talk about development timing, location, and availability of services. The property was previously rezoned. There is the existing Moody River Waterfront Park on the north portion of the site. There is existing development north and west of the site. As the applicant mentioned, the bus stop, the Gold Line seasonal bus stop to the west of the property on Moody Road. There is water and wastewater availability as evidenced in the letter of availability from Lee County Utilities. Existing sidewalks on the west side of Moody Road, as well as an existing access to the property, as well as proximity to fire and EMS and police. It's serviced by solid waste. Again, the public transit, and Moody Road is a minor collector roadway. Standards 4.1.1 and 4.1.2 talk about this water and sewer requirements in the Lee Plan, and map 4A and 4B. They're shown within the Lee County Utilities future service areas at time of development order, and the development will be required to connect to the existing utilities on site. Objective 5.1.5 is protection of the existing residential development, and we've kind of talked about that in the suburban future land use. Again, the reduced height, the less intense uses. I put 10 versus 45 with the wet slip reduction. Again, Mr. Aiken talked about the 20 with the calculation of the parking spaces. There's adequate landscape and buffering. And the reduced height from previous approvals, and the location of the building to the southwest of the site. During DO time, they'll comply with all the DO regulations where they aren't provided deviations as part of the master concept plan in this rezoning. Commercial land uses are covered in Goal 6 of the Lee Plan. Again, they're going to provide adequate landscaping and buffering and open space. They're adjacent to a minor collector roadway. The TIS provided as part of this shows no detrimental impacts to that roadway. Existing access and on-site development, available water and wastewater capacities. Urban services are available to the site, and they're preserving the existing wetlands with no impact. All these satisfy policies 6.1.1, 6.1.4, 5, and 6. Goal 30, they are within the North Fort Myers Community Plan area. There was a required meeting. The meeting was conducted, and the meeting notes and advertisements were part of the staff report. The proposal of Homefront Heroes does improve the livability of the community and provides recreational activities, youth and educational programs, community outreach. It's establishing the charitable organizations. All these things are talked about in the North Fort Myers Community Plan, and it preserves the resources, the conservation easements on site. Although they're switching the boat slips, the conservation easement's going to remain, and they're not proposing development within the island, the wetland island. Goal 60 and 61 talk about surface water management and protection of the water resources. They did provide a surface water management plan at the time of submittal that shows that the runoff's collected via catch basins and culverts, swales, dry detention areas, and discharges ultimately to Hancock Creek. The ultimate development of the site will require the South Florida ERP permit and a development order. At the time of the development order and the South Florida ERP, the design surface water management system will be evaluated for off-site impacts, requirements for water quality, attenuation, and include operation and maintenance documents. Coastal and conservation and coastal management, Goal 101 and 102. Talk about the protection of human life and the current and future development and impacts from coastal flooding. There's no wetland impacts proposed. They'll be required to meet the FEMA elevations during flooding. There is also the South Florida permitting criteria and water management permitting criteria during the permitting process for development. And also they'll have to comply with the land development code if there's proposals for sea-wall repair and replacement, as well as the Lee Plan policies 101.4.2 and 4.3 which limits new vertical seawalls and encourages planting of mangroves or placement of riprap in artificial and natural canal systems to replace existing seawalls in need of repair. Policy 123.6.1 talks about the bald eagle's nest. The environmental consultant talked about the nest. A bald eagle management plan was submitted. There was a subsequent master concept plan that was submitted post-sufficiency. The bald eagle plan that you have in the staff report was not updated with that master concept plan. That was addressed in the 48-hour letter. I just wanted to bring that up to make sure that that gets updated. There's no earthwork or planting within the 330-foot buffer, and there are limits on exterior construction in the 660-foot buffer zone during the nesting season as outlined in the Natural Resources Staff Report. The Bald Eagle Management Plan was recommended for approval by the Eagle Technical Advisory Committee, ETAC, on September 10th, 2024. And the conditions do include a condition that includes the Bald Eagle Management Plan as part of the development order. Staff finds that consistent with Goal 128.4. The Historic Preservation Policy 141.1.2. The site is in Archaeological Sensitivity Zone 2. There was no cultural resources identified by the Bureau of Historic Preservation. There is correspondence in the file, or in the staff report that was included. At time of development order, they will have to apply for a certificate to dig for the property, and the proposed uses are consistent with recreation and conservation uses on the site. The economic element, I wanted to include this in Objective 160.3 because they are providing educational opportunities and outreach, job counseling, manpower training, and workforce education, and that is consistent with the Lee Plan as well. This is one of the finding criteria that the proposal meets, the rezoning meets the code and other applicable county regulations or qualifies for a deviation. They have requested 5 deviations. During the process, deviation number 20 was withdrawn. Let me go to the next slide. It is compatible with existing and planned uses in the surrounding area. The schedule of uses was adapted to the surrounding uses in the residential area. There was a considerable discussion during the sufficiency process with staff and the applicant. The height and number of wet slips is reduced from previous approvals. There is appropriate buffering and landscaping as part of the master concept plan and conditioning of the deviations. Locates the building away from the existing residential to the north, and large portions of the site is dedicated to recreational open space. Got a picture of the existing site access there on the top, and kind of a zoom up of the master concept plan of what's proposed in the bottom. They're going to provide sufficient access to support the proposed development intensity with the existing access. It's called Cuddy Cove Place. That's one access onto Moody Road. There is a deviation number 19 for that one access. Even though the developable area is less than 10 acres, the parcel in and of itself exceeds that 10-acre requirement, and staff felt, and the applicant felt it safer to include the deviation. As the way the code reads, it doesn't exempt anything from the parcel other than the parcel size. The Department of Transportation, a memo that was included as in the staff report, did conclude that the access to the property is sufficient to support the development. TIS was provided as part of the applicant's submittal documents. The Department of Transportation memo again concluded that there were no detrimental impacts on the surrounding roadway system. A complete TIS, when a more complete development plan is provided at the time of development order, will be provided. that will analyze the proposal in more detail. Will not adversely affect environmentally critical or sensitive areas. There is no impacts proposed to the environmentally sensitive or critical areas. A protected species survey was conducted on site. No protected species were found on site. Again, the bald eagle's nest is off site. We do have conditions 28, 32, 33, and 34 in the conditions that deal with the protection of natural resources and talk directly to protecting these items. The manatee protection plan was looked at during the sufficiency with regards to the location of the boat docks and the water uses. And again, the surface water management plan plays into meeting the requirements of this finding. The site is served by urban services, Lee County Utilities with the water and wastewater. And again, the North Fort Myers Fire Department and EMS Medic 7 are located close to the site. It's served by the Lee County Sheriff's Office, Lee County Solid Waste, and public transit and pedestrian facilities. I put up the proposed mix of uses for the site shown there. They are limited, and there was some talk earlier about the why a CPD. Those uses have been discussed with the applicant and are limited specifically and tailored to the Homefront Heroes mission. They're close to Hancock Bridge. I have 800 feet there. I believe the applicant testified it was closer. That's what I measured to the actual entranceway. You may have measured to the property line. And the schedule of uses are tailored to that recreational, educational, training, and youth programs. Hancock Bridge Parkway in the North Fort Myers community is in the commercial corridor. I wanted to mention that because of the proximity to the site. The conditions established in the proposed conditions safeguard the public, and the conditions are reasonably related to the request. Each deviation, staff has found, enhances the achievements of the objectives of the plan development and preserves and promotes the general intent of the code to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. I'm not going to go through everything in the 48-hour letter. Staff did look at each of the items. There were a lot of discussion and back and forth. I met with staff individually to go through each of the items that were in the 48-hour letter. I met with the applicant. We talked through each of the items in the 48-hour letter. Staff has no objection to the attached documents that came with it. In the staff report, there were directional calls that I'm not sure how I got east and west backwards in several occasions, but I did, so I apologize for that. No objections to anything in the staff report. I do note that in number 10 on the staff report that the DOT memo states 4 units, which at the time was the equivalent of the 8,000 square feet. The next page. Going through these as well, these are cleanup items to the regulations and conditions. In number 2, there was a gap left in the staff report that did not print the table. The table that's provided is the table that was from the original zoning of the property. In number 5, condition 10, or condition 14, staff understands the removal of the commercial standards, doesn't object to it. However, we note that the condition repeats the code requirements that are currently in place. So removal, either way, staff doesn't have an objection to it. Going through the rest of the conditions, the staff has no objection to the rest of the development regulations and conditions or the environmental staff report changes or clarifications. That's the conclusion, and well, that is not the conclusion. Based on the analysis of the application and standards for approval of plan development rezoning, staff finds the request to be consistent with the established review criteria and recommends approval of the request with the conditions.
Thank you. Does the applicant have any questions of staff?
No, I do not.
Thank you. Okay, so with that, we will begin with public comment. As I said, I'm going to call the cards that I have in the order that I have them. There is, again, only one opportunity to speak, but no time limit. And if you do want to speak at the board meeting, you must speak today. So the first card that I have is for Tom Ward.
Madam Hearing Examiner, if I may, quickly, I did leave something off. I did speak to the environmental staff at the break. The condition regarding the open space, condition number 35, the correct calculation is 3.23 acres. And condition 35 should read 3.23 acres, and the condition should read 3.23 acres.
Thank you. I apologize, Mr. Ward. Whenever.
I apologize as well.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Tom Ward. I'm a resident of Moody River Estates. And I wasn't going to ask a question today. I primarily wanted to get on the email list so I could be kept abreast of everything. But I noticed on one of the slides that was just shown that the gates, the barrier arms that come down, when you enter there, it was said that they were going to remain in place for access to the boat launch. But I assume that's a temporary thing?
And we'll collect, I should have said this, and we'll make notes of any questions that you have, and then they'll answer them at the
Okay.
close of the public comment.
Right.
So I'll have them
Yeah.
answer that. The testimony, I asked the same question earlier, and what their answer was at that time, but I will leave it to them to answer again, was that they were going to remain permanently, and only residents of Moody River and the occupants of their site would have access to that first set of gates. And then they have another gate within the property that would be
For the
restricted to
boat
just,
launch?
yes.
Okay, so actually the first one's for the development itself and access to the launch for Moody River residents.
Right.
Eventually, there'll be a separate gate put in over there?
On
just
their
for
side.
the-
Are you asking about the Moody River side?
Yeah,
Okay, and I don't want to get too deep into it, but their testimony for that was that that's going to remain open. So, I did my site visit yesterday, so I probably haven't been there as often as you, but when you enter the site, you had the opportunity to go left into the
Yes.
boat ramp. That is going to stay just as it is now. So
It is.
your access would not be impeded in any
Okay.
way, but there will not be another set of gates
All right.
solely for the resident.
so when the project's completed, it's going to be open to the public?
That's a question that
So there
I'll,
won't be any barrier gates where they are right now in the main entrance?
I'll ask them to clarify that. I don't want to testify for them. I'm just repeating what they said earlier, but I don't want to get too deep into that, so I'll have them answer that
Okay.
after.
And the 10 slips right now that are proposed, are those for public access? That's the question. And I know you talked about shortages of slips for like the fire department, don't they have a couple boats that they have in the water or at least over on the downtown side of the river? And I just wondered if any other watercraft like that belong to the county, whether it's the sheriff's department or the fire department, are going to be utilizing that space or not? That's the only questions I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for coming today.
Thank you.
Okay, the next card I have is for Joyce Campana. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Joyce Campana, and I live in Lee County District 2. I had very similar questions about the boat slips. Are they currently part of 2020 conservation? And will all the boat slips be available to the public if they are part of the 2020 land conservation? I thought that any use of that property was supposed to be for everybody. And just to reiterate, I had some questions about, the second question was about flooding precautions. I believe I heard staff or whoever it was say that the FEMA guidelines for elevation would have to be followed, if I could just get a confirmation that that would apply to the whole project. And I have one other question, and I'm not sure if it's appropriate here or to be directed to the board, but it's about sources of funding. Does this all come from the Homefront group, or are there any tax dollars or tax dollar donations and that type of thing? So I don't know if that can be addressed here or probably at the board. Thank you.
Thank you for coming today, ma'am. The next card I have is for Dawn Krutz.
Good morning. Thank you for having us. I'm Dawn Krutz. Is there a way I can have a slide pulled?
Sure.
One of the slides has the Mangrove Bay neighborhood, which is who we're representing. Is this a little pointer? Can I use it? Is it on?
And it wasn't, so I'm not.
How do you,
Oh, there.
oh, wait. Okay. So this is our neighborhood here. That's my home, right there. We have moody traffic, which we hear daily and nightly. We have the boat ramp right here, which we do hear daily and nightly. So for us, I think it's more personal. I so appreciate what you all are trying to do with the Homefront Heroes. I mean, there's nothing better that I like to hear than helping children and families. I love that. But, you know, our 39 homes here, it's quiet, it's private, nobody bothers us, we don't bother anyone else. We're right on the road. Our house, our living room faces Moody, and the south side of my house faces the what's going to be the project. I have a problem with that because we're all kind of in retirement mode here, and it's going to be loud. It's going to be very loud. It's going to be very busy. The traffic, I don't know about the whole bus stop thing. The trolley that's here is only seasonal. It's not a bus. It's a trolley. It's, you know, it's not, you know, there's not 150 people that get on this bus and get off. It goes downtown. We take it all the time as neighbors. We travel downtown, come back. I think for us, it's just, I mean, I know Moody Rivers Estates is affected as well, but us being right there, is there going to be, if this goes through, what are you going to do for us as a barrier? I mean, this is going to be noisy. We're talking pickleball, we're talking basketball, we're talking, you know, outdoor activities, food trucks. I mean, I think it's respectful for us that we have an opinion that we live here because it's quiet. Not that I want to take away from what they're doing, because I really appreciate that. But sadly, I mean, as much as I would love to have that, it's for our neighborhood and the surrounding quiet areas that we have, it won't work. I mean, we don't want to move. We don't want to sell our properties to move. We love where we live. This is our retirement home. So, I mean, I know that's more personal, maybe selfish, and I don't mean to be, but this is where we plan to spend the rest of our retirement. We don't want to go. We just don't want all the noise and riffraff. I mean, the homeless population up there is crazy. The sheriff's department can't even keep them out. So they're all over the place. They walk in and out of our pool gate. I mean, they can access from the side there because we don't have a gate. There's trees and areca palms, but they still come in and out. How is that going to be prevented? How many people at a time are you going to allow for activities in this area? And where is everyone going to exactly park? I don't know. But, I mean, I vote no. I'm sorry. That's all. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
The next card that I have is for Beth Russo. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm also a Mangrove Bay resident, and along the lines of Dawn, my questions really are about capacities. Like, how many children are in the after-school program? Is there a cap? Will there be a cap for events, for example? I hadn't heard anything about food trucks and bounce houses, and I'm curious to know how often those types of events would take place, and is there a cap for the maximum number of people who can attend these events? I know that the number of parking spaces were specified, but when those parking spaces are full, what happens? Who prevents the people from then going out and parking on the street? I'm just curious to know those kinds of things.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, the next card is for Colleen Smith.
I don't have anything.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Okay, and then the last card I have is for Kirk Woodbury. Good morning.
Hello, my name is Kirk Woodbury. I'm also a resident at Mangrove Bay. I've been there for over 20 years. We were never consulted on this. There was no outreach or anything to our community. Let me just start there. You also displaced a sailing school, which had youth already there on site. We were using that property. It was well monitored. We weren't spending millions of dollars on consultants and things like that. You removed them with 30 days notice. We've also had increased flooding in our area. Up until Ian, we've never had flooding in our community. We keep filling in these sites, and they're gonna build up to code. That means they're gonna fill in more. I had water in my garage, lost 2 cars for the first time in 25 years of a storm. And we keep putting more and more things and filling up our land. You can only put so many people in a bathtub before you flood everything. I'd also like to understand what happens if this not-for-profit fails, and now we've got commercial land next to us. What's going to happen then? And why are so many people from the sheriff's office on both the LLC board and the nonprofit board? It's concerning to me, and it should be concerning to everyone else. I'd also like to know how many youths are actually going to be served, and how many of them have boats that they need slips. This is kind of concerning to me too. Are they just now going to become available to anybody that can pay enough money to have them? Why are we putting slips in there? Now, 15 or 18 years ago, the Army Corps of Engineers turned down our request to put a marina back in that place because it's a navigable waterway and it is public rights waterway. I'm really concerned about the traffic. You cannot get through the light up there in less than 2 turns anymore. At the end of here, now we have about 500 apartment doors at the end of our street where Hancock hits 41. It's going to be an hour and a half to get downtown when this starts. So we're not doing anything good for anybody else here, except unfortunately maybe 10, 15 kids. And then the sheriff gets a place for his deputies to live. I'm very concerned about this.
Thank you. Was there anyone else from the public that wanted to speak today? Okay, we'll come back. Do we need to break before you start your rebuttal? Okay, let's take 10 minutes and come back at 11 o'clock. we're going to be back on the record. So we'll begin now with the rebuttal by the applicant and the staff, and any closing comments that you may have.
All right, so Madam Hearing Examiner, again for the record, Richard Aiken. Just to kind of go through a few of the discussions, things that were brought up by the public, and I'll try to address them in order, and then I'm going to have Ms. Hewitt get up here and just address a couple of issues as well. First of all, there was a discussion about, there was questions about the marina and the marina being open to the public and the number of slips. Again, we've gone through the slips, so it's 10 wet, 10 dry. Essentially, the dry slips are really because once you put the boats in, and you got to park the trailer somewhere, and the way that the LEED plan or the Land Development Code reads is that if you've got a trailer parking space, that counts as a slip too. So there'll be 10 wet slips and 10 dry slips, and the 10 dry slips are basically will be when the boats are in the water, the trailers will be parked there. We're not proposing to have this be something that's open to the public, as far as there's not going to be boats coming in and out and using these or rented out to, you know, other members of the public. The idea here is that the boats that would be in the marina would be specifically to be used as part of the programming on site, right? So to the extent that there is ecological programming where you might take kids out on a boat, show them around the areas, you know, this island here, anywhere in the river, things like that, manatee education, that the boats might be used for that. There's also the possibility that there will be, and we hope, law enforcement boats, right, to provide law enforcement on the water. You heard Mr. Wilson talk about that, talk about the need for that in the area to enforce not only the boating laws, but the laws that would protect the manatees and other wildlife slow zones within the river, which there are a lot currently. And so that's the idea there. This is not a place where you're going to have boat traffic coming in and out from other members of the public to come and access this area. It's a private area to be used for the purpose and in connection with what is asked as part of the PD. So that's number one. Let's see. There were questions about whether someone, I believe it was Ms. Campana, discussed whether the slips were currently part of 2020. And I want to make this very clear on the record, right? So there is no Conservation 2020 easement ownership of any of this parcel that we're talking about here today. And I'm sure the hearing examiner knows, but just for the public's benefit here, Conservation 2020 is a program administered by Lee County wherein they purchase parcels of land and place them into permanent conservation easement. It happens all the time, okay? And this property is not owned by Lee County Conservation 2020, nor has there been any application for it to be owned by Conservation 2020. Now, where the confusion may come in is that the property directly to the south of this Homefront Heroes property, so beyond our southern border here, that property was recently purchased by Conservation 2020. Okay, so the stuff to the south of this is owned by Conservation 2020. What we're proposing to do here has no effect on that, all right? No effect on the southern property, no effect on the Conservation 2020 purchase. You know, it's just as if Conservation 2020 bought, you know, this island out here or something like that. It's a completely different parcel. What we're doing will not affect that. So the discussion about the conservation easement, just for the public's benefit to understand this, is that we could, if we wanted to, put more than the boat slips that we're requesting to put on here. If you just do the calculation of the amount of shoreline, the water depth, there's a calculation that you go through in order to make that determination. We could request more than what we're requesting, but we're not. So what we're doing is we're going to put a conservation easement that limits the number of slips that we're allowed to use, the number of watercraft slips, to the request that we've stated in here. So there'll be a conservation easement limiting the slips to 20, which is 10 wet, 10 dry. So I want to make that clear just for the members of the public so that there's not any confusion about that. And if there's any other questions, Madam Hearing Examiner, happy to answer those. Let's see. There were questions about the flooding precautions and FEMA and whether the FEMA guidelines would apply. We are required to comply with the FEMA guidelines and with the requirements of the Lee County Land Development Code. I believe that's already been testified to and very clear in the record. There were also a couple of questions raised about ongoing flooding. I believe one of the individuals indicated that there were flooding problems in Mangrove Bay that they already have. And I do want to point out that Mangrove Bay currently has a code violation that's open in Lee County. It's the violation number is VIO 2023-04771. It's a violation for basically their dry detention areas are not in compliance, and they're in for a development order to, I believe, resolve that issue. So some of their ongoing issues with flooding may be due to the fact that their dry detention areas are not in compliance. However, I would like to say that we, as you heard Sam Marshall testify to earlier, are required to manage our stormwater and to ensure that we do not discharge it or flood it onto others' properties. And we've submitted a stormwater or a water management plan as part of the application, but we will also be required to go through the water management district and comply with all those at the time of development order. So at the end of the day, I understand the concerns about flooding. I also understand the concerns about flooding as a result of hurricane. Many of us have been affected by that, but the development of our property will have to be consistent with and compliant with all of the water management regulations, and we will be, and we've testified to that today. So I wanted to clarify, there was a question about the bus stop, and I think the hearing examiner clarified this earlier, but we're not proposing to put an additional bus stop as a result of this. So there is an existing bus stop, as Ms. Hewitt explained, but we're not going to add one. There was some discussion and concern about, I believe the term riffraff was used, or homeless in the area. As you've heard, we are asking to put 2 caretakers residents on site. Those 2 caretakers residents would be for caretakers of the site, but they would essentially be employees of the sheriff's department, is our anticipation, sheriff's deputies, right? So if there is a concern in this area about those things, it's our belief that that would do nothing to make that problem worse. It would only make it better by having a consistent law enforcement presence, not only in this site, but in this general area where they would be able to assist members of the public with a homeless problem, a vagrancy problem if necessary, or other problems that may come up over time. There was discussion about what was on the site before, or something about a sailing center. I will just say this, that it's my understanding that when Homefront Heroes took ownership of the property, there was a number of things going on site that were not, or that were in violation of the allowed zoning that was there. And so they did take over, and they took action to make sure that it was compliant with what was allowed out there. And we'll leave it at that for right now. I want to point out, and you can see on the master concept plan, because the residents of Mangrove Bay, which are up here, have expressed concern about noise and essentially what may happen here. You can see on the master concept plan, there's a note right here that from here up to our northern property line, where this little hash is, that's 112 feet. There's a buffer there. Right, so that's 112 feet, and that would be before there would be even the caretaker's residence, all right? And if you extend that on down, there will be well over 200 feet before you get to anything other than what would be the caretaker's residences or the parking area, right? So there's a substantial distance between Mangrove Bay and what we are proposing to put in here as part of these changes. There is the existing boat ramp in place that will be between the development Homefront Heroes is proposing and Mangrove Bay, but that's an existing use. It's not going to change. We're not opening that to the public. So there is a considerable buffer there. There were questions about the number of people that would attend this area and how many people are going to be here. Well, essentially, that's going to be governed by the size of the building that gets built and what's the occupancy capacity of that building, which I don't know. I mean, we're allowed up to a certain number of square feet now, but we could build less, and so that would make it less. It's also going to be governed, I believe, as you well know, by the amount of parking that we have on site. So I can't give exact numbers at this time because part of it will depend on how many people sign up, but we are limited by the space that we have in the county regulations to that end.
So the parking, there isn't like a separate parking table at this point because as you just said there isn't a companion DO, but I assume that, or I guess can you explain what that process would look like then? Because you've just kind of got a conceptual layout, but can you explain how the parking would dictate to some extent what the size of the building could be and what use category you would use to make that calculation?
I probably can. I'm probably going to need some help from Ms. Hewitt to go through that. But I mean, on a high level, and I'm sure you understand this, the way the parking works is that the Lee County Land Development Code requires a certain number of spots per square footage of building space, depending on the type of use of the building, right? And we're required to have that many parking spaces unless we ask for a deviation, which we've not done as part of this request here today, which means that you are limited by how much site room you have on space to park, right? And you can't have more people on site than you can park, which I think also addresses the parking on the street as best I can really address it, is that, look, we're allowed and required to have parking for the uses that we have on site. And we will have to go through that at the time of development order with staff in order to make sure that we have met the requirements of the code, since we are not asking for a deviation from that at this time. And I don't know how to get into further detail because without knowing exactly what the building will be, it's hard to say.
And I think the temporary uses was a concern that they were expressing as well. Usually the sheriff's deputies are the ones that are directing traffic, so will that be controlled as well? Is that the expectation, that if you're hosting these events, there would be sheriff's deputies on site to ensure that there aren't backflow issues backing up into the roadway?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is yes, and that's what's happened, before, to date, when the Homefront Heroes has had other events. And yes, sheriff's deputies will be on site to direct traffic, make sure that we're not having traffic out on the streets. I can assure you that, to the extent there's sheriff's deputies involved, they're not directing people to park in places that are unsafe or that would create a traffic hazard. As they would be the ones that would get called to address that if there was an issue that was doing that. So that won't be the case. There were some questions as well about some of the uses and the concerns about noise. And so what I'll say is that, the current list of approved uses on site already allows outdoor pickleball courts, tennis courts, things of that nature. So we're not asking to add anything that wasn't already there. Now, to some degree, there's a large part of the reason why we're asking to put this building in place, and you heard this earlier, is that, yeah, there will be some outdoor recreational uses, but I think we'd like to have some indoor courts that will address some of that noise issue and address a capacity issue and a place for these things to be, right? So the reason we want a building is we can hopefully put basketball court, who knows what else within that area. But we are required, as we said earlier, to comply with the Lee County Noise Ordinance, which is requirement of not only this property, but all the other surrounding properties. And we're not asking to deviate from that in any way. We will comply with it. And based on the distance from Mangrove Bay to the areas where these events will be occurring and the requirement that the noise ordinance applies, I can't imagine that that's going to be a compatibility issue. And Ms. Hewitt's going to come up and talk about that in just a minute, since I'm an attorney and she's a planner. But ultimately, just from a factual, straightforward basis, I think that takes care of itself. There were discussions and questions about, one gentleman asked about, are the boat slips for the youth? Are we going to have youth driving boats? Again, I think I answered that when I talked about what the purpose of the boats would be, but if we need to go there further, we can. There was the first gentleman, Mr. Ward, asked questions about the gates, and you discussed that a little bit earlier. All right, so right now, what I can tell you is that there is no plan, as we sit here today, to take out the existing gates that prevent members of the public who don't have access but allow access for the Moody River Estates folks. There's no plan to change that. I don't know that we could make a commitment that we would never change the way the gates are at this moment, but what we are clear on is that if we have to move the gate like over here somewhere, the bottom line is that there will always be access to the boat ramp for the Moody River Estates residents, as it's required to be, and there will never be access for anyone who's not to the public, all right? So even if we have to reconfigure the gate, they will have access, they will have the ability to get in, and it will not be open to the public. It's that simple. Is there anything that I've missed that you recall from the statements? I think that pretty much covers my list. Funding.
That's not an appropriate, I'm sorry, sir, that's not an appropriate question for this forum. I know it was mentioned that the lady that mentioned it wants to address that with the board, and you can speak to the board at what you spoke about today, but it's not something that we can speak about. It's not any relevant to the request. I have an hours of operation question, but I don't know if you want me to ask you or ask Ms. Hewitt.
Why don't you ask me, and maybe Ms. Hewitt will answer it. Let's see.
Well, because of the events, and it was a question I had going through the materials, because there was repeated mention that it's an after-school, in terms of traffic, in terms of noise, in terms of all the off-site potential impacts that this might have. You're saying that you're limited to after-school weekends primarily. So is there any discussion that had been had with staff about limiting hours of operation? Because I think that would potentially provide some comfort to the surrounding residents, just to know you're not talking about late night food truck event parties. It doesn't seem like that would be in the spirit of what you're proposing, but absent a condition that says that, they don't have any assurance of that. So I don't know if that's something that's been discussed.
Yeah, so I don't believe it's been discussed with staff. We did discuss it a little bit ourselves internally. Just, I guess, here's my thought. I'll just kind of give you, so if the hearing examiner wanted to go down the road of conditioning or saying that if you're going to have an event with food trucks, it can't occur past a certain time at night, I think we would probably be okay with that based on our discussions. But we haven't been doing that to begin with, and I don't think there's any real desire to do it. There's also no proposal at this point in time to put outdoor lighting or anything like that in the recreation area. My concern with an hours of operation condition, if not carefully crafted, is that, I don't think that there is an issue with hours of operation, especially once the indoor building is built and people going in and out of that, right? It seems like the concern is maybe just around, hey, you have an event and there's food trucks outdoors and we don't want them there at midnight on a Friday night. And that's a fair, I understand why the public would raise that question. So if, that hasn't been occurring and we don't have any intent to do that anyway. So I don't know how you want to address that. But
Did Ms. Hewitt have something?
yes, she does.
I just want, Stacy Hewitt for the record. I did want to just, as was already put on the record, just about the existing approval and what's allowed on the site with the existing zoning. It already included uses such as recreation facilities, personal and private on-site, tennis courts, and the private recreational facility is allowed on site today with the existing buffer that was installed and exists along that north property line. And as Mr. Aiken said, the uses on the site are all around 200 feet south from that property line as well. I just wanted to reiterate that those recreation uses are already allowed outdoors. And also, as stated, we will be required to comply with the noise ordinance, which reduces the allowable noise levels between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. And that's consistent with this site and all surrounding properties. And that would remain, of course, in effect, and we would have to comply with that. There's also some concern with, as far as any hours of operation, what that would apply to on the site. Now, I believe that addressed the most existing uses as far as our rebuttal. But I do believe there were two conditions that we were talking about that I did want to circle back before we close the record.
And we can leave the record open to address that, because I do want you to make that correction. And I think it's 35, and it's probably 2. I'm guessing it's condition 2 that has a schedule of uses.
Yes.
Not having it right in front of me.
Yes.
So if that is an opportunity, if we want, I'll hear from staff too, but if there is some willingness to discuss an hours of operation condition, that's something else you could include in that if you can come to some agreement.
There is on our end. I just discussed it with the client. So we can discuss that with staff as part of the leaving the record open and propose something.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Would staff have any rebuttal comments?
I do not.
Okay. And hours of operation, was that something that you had discussed previously?
We had not discussed hours of operation previously.
Okay. So I'm going to leave the record open to give you an opportunity to do that, and then make whatever other revisions we discussed to the to the conditions, not the master concept plan. How long do you think that you would need to do that?
Want to do 2 weeks and get it in sooner?
2 weeks from now. Can we have 2 weeks from tomorrow? I think we get it in sooner than that, but that gives us a little flexibility.
Okay, thank you. So it would be by the end of business on March 28th is when it would be due. If you need an extension for that, just request that in writing to my office. And if you can complete it sooner, certainly do that as well. You can complete it at any time. Thank you for everyone that came today. Again, if you spoke, you will receive a copy of the recommendation that I'll be issuing to the Board of County Commissioners, as well as the notice of when they're going to hold that hearing. And again, thank you for your time for coming down here. I appreciate it. I know downtown traffic can be a bit of a nightmare, so thank you for bearing with us this morning, and please stay well, everyone. Stay safe.